And are we on?
You are.
Okay. Welcome. It's Thursday, February 13th. We are the Senate Transportation Committee. My name's Rich Westman. I'm the chair of the committee. We are here with the fiscal officer from the Agency of Transportation. And I think what we had asked you was, you gave us a very interesting presentation about what it meant to get the 20 million in the JTOC back into the budget.
Yeah.
We have a budget built with 12.5 million this year in one-time money coming from the general fund, and assumptions were made in all of it. The question really is that 12.5 million is not going to be there. It's a flat revenue source coming back in JTOC, and the question is based upon similar assumptions that were made this year. If we did a steady state kind of budget going out, where are we next year? Where are we the year after? Knowing that we can't go out all that far.
So Candace Almquist, Chief Financial Officer for the record. Wonderful. I'm glad that we're aligned on why I'm here. And thank you for explaining, Chair. I have prepared a federal fund and state fund match outlook that should look similar to previous years.
And do we have that?
Yes.
I want to apologize. In the course of my iPads in the Appropriations Committee, and
Yes, it is that one. Yeah. And it is also on the screen. So it's same format as last year, but just to reorient the committee, a lot of assumptions needed to be made in these projections, which go out to 2030. We used our IIJA federal apportionment that we have through federal fiscal year 2026, and then working with DDM Smith, who is the contractor who helped us with our funding and finance study. We assumed a 2.4% inflation factor on that apportionment. Again, that's quite an assumption. But we had to start somewhere. We do have a number of, sorry.
So which line are we where?
So this would be the very first line where it says IIJA
projects
for highway programs.
Okay.
Yes.
So you the assumption here is a 2.4%.
2.5% growth on top of the current apportionment that's only guaranteed through federal fiscal year 2026.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. We have a number of competitive grants here that we would like to apply for over the next 4 years. And the related state match that would be needed for those competitive grants are included in the bottom line figure. So that deficit reflects not only like our core operations, what we're doing right now, plus, an inflation factor into the future, but also competitive grants that we wish we had state match for. And that is similar to how we presented to the committee in prior years.
So core budget, 2.5% growth. and then roughly four grants that we're gonna try to get that. Okay,
Yes,
if we, and those areas were again the four grants.
sorry, when you say four
Yeah.
Yeah,
grants,
was it four that you said?
no,
Four
sorry,
grants.
this whole list here
The whole list.
are the competitive grants.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry, I misunderstood.
The calculation on the bottom of surplus deficit assumes that we are able to use the JTAC appropriation for this year
Yep,
and in all future years.
yep,
So this deficit is on top of the 20.25 million that we hope to receive.
and without the 12.5 that we've got this year coming
Correct.
from the general fund.
Correct.
Okay?
Yeah, so when we look at this first deficit, the 30.6, the way that I see that in my head, it's the 12.5 million that we're relying on in the cash fund this year. We have the 4.5 that we're expecting in reversions in July. And then the delta would be the effect of inflation plus competitive grants. For each one of these figures, I have the difference between what we would need for state match for competitive grants versus inflation for 2027. Amount of the difference between 30.6 minus the 12.5 minus the 4.5 is actually all state match needed for competitive grants. We don't really see the effect of inflation until 28, 29, 30.
So,
That's just based on looking at like the consensus revenue forecast that's available in the out years.
So the competitive grants would, in this scenario, would all have to go.
Correct. Although I do know that some of these have already been either submitted or obtained. So I think
But if we didn't have the match, we just wouldn't take it.
I think that's true for most of them, but for perhaps the highway programs, what we might do is AC other projects
Okay,
that would, and when I say AC, it's advanced construction.
yep,
It basically means borrowing against a future apportionment with FHWA.
so would it? You can't. But am I fair to say that when I look at these in the competitive grants, that we would be foregoing without being able to make up this 30 million, the 102 is what we would be foregoing in,
The 102 is a federal number. So
we would be giving up 102 million.
I think that we really would, if we were talking realistically here, we'd keep Reedsboro, Springfield, Richmond, and Winooski. Those would be ones that, if received, we would really want to do those projects.
But you would have to shift from someplace else. I'm trying to get the whole scope of we'd be 30 million down.
Right.
And we would have to give up someplace in this. We would either give up stuff that we would match, or we'd have to cut back on things that were 100% our own transportation dollars, maintenance, for example. Or we could cut pounds, but a fair number is that we would have at risk at least 100 million in monies that we would draw down.
I think that's fair, because even if we decided, you know what, a portion, like 40% of that 100 million are critical projects and we're going to AC instead, like federal highways is always trying to get us to reduce advanced construction and the mod list that goes along with that. So it's a tool in our toolbox, but a difficult decision, one that we would have to, make if we came to that point next year.
And then that grows to 45 in 2028
Correct.
with 140 in federal.
Correct.
Okay. Andy?
Is the match the same, or is it are there match requirement calculations in here that we can't see, or is it
There,
flat 80?
no. There are match calculations for each one of these grants that are in the back end, that are like a part of the assumptions, but those are not assumptions because we know for a fact what the matches for each one of these competitive grant lines.
So some of them might be easier to give up if the match is higher.
Correct.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So which of these have you noted that some of these have already been, either we've been told we're getting them, or that have already been obligated? Which of those are on that list that we've already we've gotten, and which of these are not?
I'm going to defer to the chief engineer, Jeremy Reed.
Yeah, so Jeremy Reed, chief engineer. So things are a little bit in flux in Washington.
Yeah, that was my
So that aside, we have been notified, we were awarded the Reedsville grant, which is the rural surface transportation one. We've been told we received one of the Winooski River Bridge grants. And I think it's the $23 million grant, the top one. We have been told we received the Attain grant.
23 million, like a 23 million Winooski grant?
Yes. So it's a very top one, the Raise Winooski River Bridge grant.
The original application.
Yeah.
So it's that,
It's like it says a million.
is
Yeah,
it like
I think
11 plus
23.
11 plus 1, is that? what it is?
Yeah, I forget off all those numbers. Right, so it's 11 and a half, 1, I think.
Yeah. And then the Attain one is,
And the Attain one, we've been notified that we've received that. We have a belief that we are entitled to the 2 bridge investment program grants, which would be the Springfield and Richmond. We believe that's codified in law. So we have a great deal of optimism with that. Similarly, we have a high level of optimism with the second Winooski River Bridge Raise grant as well, just because we would have 2 or 3 successive years in applying for that grant. The EPS Protect grant, I think, is a uncertainty. And I'll sort of look to Michelle maybe on the others.
So Michelle Boomhauer, Agency of Transportation. I can't read the font. I don't have the printout, but I believe the Chrissy Rail Grant is the next one.
You aren't alone in that. It's pretty small.
Let me try to make it bigger. Hold on, Michelle.
That's okay. I can wrap these up. There,
that's good.
Yeah.
Zoom in.
Except now you can't.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
We need a bigger screen.
It's empty.
All right, so we have the Attain ITS grant. Did you speak to that?
Yeah, we've
okay.
received the
FTA bus and bus facilities program grants. That's a question mark at this point. Airport improvement program grants. Also, these are discretionary grants. And so under the new administration, there are going to be new frameworks for discretionary grants, and they're paused in terms of, even if they've awarded them, they're paused in terms of obligating them right now. And we don't know how long that pause is going to last. And that applies to some of the grants Jeremy was speaking to, or if there will be new criteria related to them. So there's a lot in flux. Additionally, the EPS CERC revenue collection grant, that's for our mileage-based user fee. That's $3 million. We've been awarded, but not obligated. The Protect Resilience grants Jeremy spoke to, also in question. And then the Rail Chrissy program grant, we made an application for that did not get funded last year. We have fairly high hopes for that, but once again, it is discretionary funding, so we'll see.
Okay.
And as I look at it, we have received the DMV Federal Motor Carrier Safety Grant. That's for our e-permitting project. So that again is a certain, well, as certain as we can be.
Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate you knowing that information and sharing that information. The reason I ask is because I know that we had high hopes or high expectations for an EV related grant, competitive grant program that we ultimately did not receive. Are these the only competitive grants that we are applying for or seeking?
The competitive grant list was reviewed with our federal policy manager, so I'd say yes, but this is a snapshot in time. So this is like as of
We don't
February
know,
2025.
we have no idea what Congress is gonna do or anybody, and, you know, they might come up with a nice idea to do more infrastructure.
Tesla chargers for everybody. You
Sure.
don't know. Okay, well, that's really helpful.
It's fair to say that if the total federal funding line is 408, that of that 408, we're due just next year, one step at a time. 102 million of it is at risk if we can't come up with a match. Is that correct?
Depends on what the match requirement is, each one, 102 would be the total, but
I
that
think,
would be a 70.
so that 408 includes federal apportionment money. So I don't think I don't think the apportionment is at risk right now, except that we don't know what the new authorization.
Yeah,
of IIJA
I get all of that,
Yeah.
but without match,
Oh, I see what you're saying, Senator.
without match, we're at risk to lose about a quarter of, if without match, we would be at risk of losing, 100 million of the 400. Is that right?
At a 70-30 match, that would be the best.
Yeah,
Yeah, it doesn't work. So
it doesn't work quite perfectly, but
right, because
if I was trying to explain it to somebody outside of this room, and they're saying, what's at risk in transportation right now? And I'm trying to make a case for us being able to put together our budget.
correct. And I guess what I would say is I think there would be more at risk. So if we look at a total delta of $40 million, right? Some of those are 90-10 splits.
Yep.
So of the $102 million of grants, we only need $10 million potentially for state match. Some of them are 80-20, so just do that math, you only need 20 million. So if the delta is 40, I would say not only is the 102 at risk, but some formula money's at risk as well.
Absolutely.
I'm just trying to be fair. And when I articulate to other people in the legislature that don't spend every day at this, what's a fair characterization to say is at risk because we have
Sure.
match
Yeah.
issues around match that are potential.
So on average, our federal funds compose 83%. So you could take that 40 million, let's say, and divide it by 17%, and that's what would be at risk for the fund, for the total federal funds.
Why are you saying 49 and 30?
I'm just rounding, I'm sorry, I can't exactly number, but let's just say it's 40 million.
30.
Well, next year it's 30 million, so I would, that would be 18%. And then on top of that,
Yeah, so you can take whatever the deficit is and divide it by 17%. And
Okay.
that would give you your relative formula at-risk money or federal at-risk money.
I think that would be a good rough estimate here.
Go ahead.
So what is the revenue plan?
So the way I see the issue for 2027 is we have the $12.5 million hole that we're relying on in the cash fund this year. That's going to be my primary problem for next year. The 4.5 million in reversions for July, I'm hopeful that we as an agency can absorb that with minimal pain this July. And if so, I'd be comfortable putting that forward again in future years, but I have to see how fiscal 25 closeout goes. And then the remaining delta, which for 27 is all state match for competitive grants, it's about $14 million when you do the math. Like Jeremy said, we are either already expecting or have received those grants from the highway programs. So we'd likely need to AC. If we wanted to, or if we were directed by federal highways to not AC, then I would be adding on to the 12.5 million that I have to find next year.
So there's no, so I think if I'm understanding correctly, there's kind of internal math that you're doing to hopefully make it work, rather than seeking increased revenue from externally.
We have the funding and finance study, and I think those discussions are happening at a higher level than just me as a CFO.
Oh, yeah. But that you're not planning any of there's no particular guidance you've been given to go.
Not at this point, but I also, just knowing how the budget schedule works, I wouldn't expect that kind of direction until perhaps August. So we're a little ahead.
We're not. Did you want to say something, Secretary?
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Joe Flynn, Secretary. I would just add to what Candace said too. One of the things that play into the process that, as Candace said, starts for us typically around the 1st of August is the July e-board outcome and the revenue forecast. It isn't going to make up tens of millions of dollars, but it can certainly help or hurt. And so that's an unknown until we get to that point. But I think more to the question I think you're asking, Senator White, is, you know, if we need to look across the divisions of the agency, it isn't just highway that, you know, we look at, you know, where might we postpone something, you know, whether it's the purchase of a piece of equipment, or not do this fence line at an airport. That isn't going to give us significant savings in one item, but that's the process. When everybody sits around the table, it's the aggregate that we look at to see what could be postponed. And it isn't just in the highway program, I think is the point I'm trying to make. But really the biggest wild card here for the fiscal 27 budget in two ways is the outcome of this winter, which right now, I don't think any of us are counting on being overly flush, and, you know, the revenue increase or decrease come July.
We're having a normal winter, so in the maintenance area,
Right.
keep my roads plowed.
Yeah.
Please, sir.
Understood.
Go ahead.
I just have a question, and if this is something I should talk about the offline, let me know. But
No,
I just want to understand more about the HC process, because you said it's a financing. What, where to finance?
AC stands for Advanced Construction, and it's a tool that we have with Federal Highway Administration to basically borrow against a future apportionment.
Okay.
It is, you could think of it like a loan from Federal Highway. And as we are loaning money from them, they are always trying to get us to use less of the loan.
Is there interest?
No.
So do you ever bond things? Does this fund bond?
We have again, for me,
Okay.
about 3 years ago, we paid off all our bonds. We
Okay.
have no bond and indebtedness at this point. We do have bonding capacity, but that's again, a decision that would or would not be made once we get into the budget building process, and bonding has to be something that you do specific to a particular project. You
Okay.
can't just bond for operating revenue.
No, and you
You
shouldn't,
would,
right?
you would probably go to the tip bond fund
Correct.
first, then you
Right.
would do bridges
Right.
first. And,
Yeah.
but
Okay, I just wanted to
Yeah.
know that was,
And if I could just add to the disadvantage, and Jeremy may have more, but if you think of it like a credit card without fees, if you will, this advanced construction, we're not borrowing money that isn't already coming to us, because every year of the formula funds, we know exactly how much we're going to get. And that's a deal that's been appropriated. It just comes annually and we bill weekly. What we're doing is the advanced construction allows us to borrow against for funding that we know we have coming, to use someplace where in the case of highway construction, where we may be tight at this moment. And it sort of perpetuates, right? When it's always something that's happening, but to the point Candace is making as well, we try to keep it to a workable minimum and not get too heavily into AC. And, but it is a tool. Just think of a project's price as sort of elastic. It allows us to pull money in from a future project to meet a unforeseen need. That future project will have to be made whole. And that is something we have to deal with in the future, but it's a common practice. I think it's certainly been common in all the years I've been at the agency, going back to 2009 when I first started, minus a hiatus. But of late, the pressures have been higher because of when we were at 9% inflation and what we are still experiencing for pricing across the board. So just.
okay, that's really helpful. So
we
just,
heard 40%
Yes.
between 2021 and 2020.
It is, yeah.
And if, so to further the secretary's point, when we talk about AC, we're not at zero today.
Right.
Right, so if I had to guess, right now, I think we're probably in the $400 million range of AC money. So our ability to AC is relatively constrained. I would also say that the best use of AC is when you have a federally constrained budget, not a state constrained budget. So in the sort of example we're talking here, AC doesn't necessarily really get us out of that. It's a tool we can use to sort of reconcile, but it's not going to help us reach state match for federal funds. It really allows us to extend federal funds.
okay, so can I just,
Go ahead.
so I just really want to understand. So you're getting dollars for future projects, but dollars in the future are going to be worth less. There's probably not they don't.
It's a-
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah, so
But
let me describe the most judicious use of AC. So the Royalton Bridge project right now, it's like a 4-year project. We have a burn rate on that project, let's just call it $10 million a year. When we get that working at, or when we allocate money for that project, just from a housekeeping perspective, it's easier to obligate all of that project at once and not do like 10 million tranches, $10 million tranches. So we'll AC that project for the first 3 years and then do, for instance, a $40 million conversion at the end.
okay, so that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
But what I heard was that the AC could be for a different project.
Yeah,
I mean, you can spend it on a different project.
absolutely. So another example, which isn't as judicious of a use, when the Fairleigh Ledge project happened, right? We AC'd that because that was a $10 million emergency that we did not have planned.
Okay.
And so we're not necessarily tied to a project, but we do have basically that ability to be flexible,
Okay.
both within that year and then within the out years as well.
Okay, so one last question for now. What the federal government has done, there's the two categories of, it's appropriated, but it's not obligated. I don't know if those are the right. So is AC just for the appropriated, or is it for the obligated, or?
The AC is for
gonna
obligated
change, go for
funds.
obligated? So,
Right.
so it's.
So it's a tool to essentially, basically, in the simplest form, AC is a commitment
Yep.
that gives you the ability to obligate funds later.
Okay, and just like front them, basically, you're
It's
fronting them.
legally obligated through the acts of Congress.
Okay,
So it's outside of the current landscape where on a daily basis and sometimes within the same day, things are paused or rescinded or paused. And that's not a political statement.
no, I understand, that was my
So
question.
the
Okay,
HC, there's no pause. The Federal Highway Administration is fully functional when it comes to our formula money.
okay,
It's fully functional. And that needs to be
and
stated.
that's actually really good to hear, it's
Yeah.
great to have that on there. Thank you.
So I'm gonna, in your core programs,
Yes,
that you figured in, does that include aid to, communities, county highway grants?
yes,
It does include.
it does.
So it would be a 2.5% increase across the board in all of those programs too.
I assume 3% for operating, 2.5 for the apportionment, but 3% for.
So I'm beat my dead horse here. I'm not hear that. So really what's at risk is someplace in the hard decisions that will be having to be made, management, revenue sources, all of it. We're looking at a field of someplace between 140 and 150 million in federal dollars is at risk.
I think it's more like 180.
Think it's 180.
If I take 30.6 and divide it by 0.17,
Okay,
that's
so it's
chief
180.
engineer suggested.
I'm using your number.
It's 180.
I didn't wanna go too high. But 180.
I'm just following the engineers, it's right.
I don't like your math, but it is what it is.
And there's a huge margin there, right?
No, totally, and a lot of it is decisions and, would you advance projects or not? Would we bond, what would we do? But I think it highlights the difficulty that we're in compared to where we have been. Yeah, go ahead.
You remind me like which cash fund these transfers are from?
Yes, the 25 million transfer is this year. We have already uploaded those funds, and actually the transfer has already occurred from the cash fund to the
Which
transportation
cash
fund.
fund?
It is the capital fund for investments.
Okay.
Yes,
Got
Is
it.
that the capital fund that's in
The
institutions?
yes,
Yeah.
So that, can I,
and it is the same fund that currently has reserved 12.5 million for us. So as part of the GovRec language, we unreserve the 12.5 and then transfer it to the transportation fund for use in 26. I'm sorry, Senator.
no, that's fine. So, I thought that 25 million was when it could just still be that way for a capital project. So you
I believe the language was state match for IIJA needs.
okay,
Which are,
which some of which are capital, but are they all capital?
We would be able to show that they were used for state match for IIJA projects.
Okay, so it was a specific, it was one of the garages, but no, okay.
The only garage is currently District 8 in Swan. And if I'm following the conversation right, the tranche of money that was allowed us in prior legislation did not go to that garage.
Okay, so I'll just,
It was.
Figure that out.
State match. It was the year, if it's the same conversation, it was the year that the legislature combined this bucket of money with the increase in the DMV fees. Because I believe in that year, we were showing a need for 50 million. There was a $500 million surplus, and what the legislature decided to do was the DMV fees would bring a piece of that, and the balance of that is in, if I'm correct, is in the fund Candace is talking about.
I'm not sure what conversations may have happened that didn't make it into the bill, but the bill, just said state match for the IOJ.
Okay. And that was an appropriation, so I
We
had,
did it in the big bill, not in the T bill.
okay. Right, but it was also discussed in the capital bill, but.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll go back and look at it, because I didn't realize that that was part of this conversation.
And they would all be CAT projects. There's no IIJ project that's not a CAT project.
Okay. All right, that's good.
I am going to ask you to maybe sit down with me and help. This is extremely helpful. And this highlights, I think, extremely well the difficulties that everybody in this room is gonna be faced with moving forward. But this chart is difficult to take out of this room with people that aren't dealing with this every day. And as we talk about what this all is going to look like and the difficulties that maintaining our the vital infrastructure that we're all charged with making sure that we hand off in at least as good a shape as we got in. It needs to be a little clearer and simpler for people that don't deal with this every day. So I'll want to work with you and because we're going to need to be very clear with people about what the issues are facing us going forward.
Okay. Sounds good, Senator.
And this is probably not the last time you're going to be asked to say that.
Fine. I'm happy to do an encore of either the presentation I gave last week or this or another one.
Yeah, it's daunting.
And I'm glad the secretary brought up the DMV fees, and I'll try not to say this again, but had we not raised the DMV fees, that would be another $16 million that we would have in this fiscal year. And then we times that by 0.17, that would be all, or you would just totally take a lot of positions out of DMV, but I think it's an example of how it was needed, even though this last election here, once again, criticized for doing. You've heard my.
This is not I'm sure it's not the last time you're going to say this too.
I
So,
made my point.
and we appreciate your point and, you know, that.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna have to make difficult decisions in the same way this biennium. And I'm happy for us to be courageous and to make tough calls to actually invest in infrastructure that we need.
I do think our first job in here, though, is to be clear in a voice, telling people around the legislature and out in the public where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, stop sharing here and let one of my colleagues come take the hot seat.
Wait, how many months are you on the job now again?
I was just thinking, I think 8.5.
Okay, you,
No, you're
yeah,
doing great.
don't go.
Oh, I'm gonna click around. If I can.
Like Mary Poppins, I just went to love and joy everywhere I go.
That's funny.
But my staff, like, here. disabled.
Anytime you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and committee members. Jeremy Reed, Chief Engineer, Division Director for the Highway Division. The intent of this presentation is to just give a high level overcap of the Highway Division budget with the understanding that each program will be coming in later to present on their specific programs. So this is the high level comparison between FY25 and the governor's 26 recommend. The paving, and we could just go down this really quick, but please stop if you have any specific question. So we needed to reduce the paving program by roughly $27 million. Interstate bridge by roughly 18 million. State Highway Bridge actually saw an increase, and that's largely because of some flood projects that are coming online. So again, those are reliant on federal highway ER money and not our traditional formula funds. Roadways largely level funded. Again, that gets a little bit of a shot in the arm because of federal highway ER money. Traffic and safety is down about 10%. Parking rides are up, and that's largely due to just two projects overlapping. We had to push the Manchester parking ride last year a little bit, and then we're working on a parking ride in Sharon. So just some overlapping construction projects there. Bike and ped is showing a very significant increase, but I want to stress that 10 million of that is just a pass through to South Burlington for the east-west corridor. So really it's basically level funded. There isn't a significant increase there. Small increase in transportation alternatives, and that's largely a byproduct of projects just coming to construction. So with IIJA, there's a significant increase in those federal monies. Takes some time for those to actually make their way to construction, and that's what's represented there. And then program development admin and rest areas round out the budget. So on the right side of the screen, you can see which projects or the volume of projects going to construction. I would say the first half dozen are largely V-Trans projects, and then those below the parking rides, the bike and ped projects, and the transportation alternatives, those come to fruition through grants to local communities. And then we are obviously overseeing the 3 rest area improvement projects. I want to add that,
To back,
please.
so it's a pretty significant, if I was going to characterize paving in your first line, and it says 20% down or 21% down. What am I talking about miles of roads?
So,
So as I'm talking to people
sure.
out in the community, they look at the dollars and they have, but what does that mean in roads?
Sure. So at our peak, when we were at $140 million paving program, we were at 220 miles roughly. This year, we're looking at 120 miles. So there isn't a direct correlation because the type of project we do has an impact as well, right? So it's not just a flat linear apportionment. That being said, reality is we're doing roughly 100 miles less in paving this year than we did at our peak 2 years ago.
So The 130 is the 25 budget year.
Yep.
26, which is being proposed. It's 120 miles.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Chair. I can't find the slides you're on. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we have it.
So
Well,
I
can't
have
either, so.
I can look it up on the iPad.
Not in this.
Yeah, I kept trying to
Yeah,
find it.
That's
similar
Michelle, the
to
next
that, yeah.
presentation. That's not his presentation.
I'll find it for you.
All right.
I was like, am I
Okay.
losing my mind?
Yeah, just may I follow up on your?
Yeah, absolutely.
So would you have, you probably have a paving plan, multi-year paving plan. So how far below is this from what you wanted?
What's
Or is it?
what would our
below?
goal?
I guess,
What would our goal for
Yeah.
maintenance of the system be?
can I ask the question a different way? So there's standards, obviously, right, for
Yeah.
roads, so you probably pay to a certain amount, you have a goal, I don't know the
Correct.
number or the letter.
Yep.
So what is your standard, and does this reduce the overall condition in the state?
So it's a bit of a nuanced conversation. What I can say is we have two performance measures as it relates to
Okay.
paving. One is a travel weighted average. And let me back up. So when we look at sort of the score of a paving
Yeah.
section or a quality index, it's a 0 to 100 scale. And so what we try to do is have that travel weighted average, which is the numerical value of that 1/10 of a mile section, multiplied by basically how much traffic it sees. Okay. And so our performance measure there is 70. We are hovering right around that now. And I can get into a bit where we're projecting we're going to go next week. I think I'm on the docket for that, and I don't have that off the top of my head. But at this funding level, we will see a decrease in quality.
Can you make sure that next week when you come in, that we concentrate a little bit? So
Absolutely.
we can better understand what those performance measures are
Yes.
and what keeping up means.
Yes. And that's a great point because, the notion of what do you need is really dependent on where you're starting, right? Because preservation adds value at pennies on the dollar. But yes, next week we can dive right into that. The second performance measure we have is just trying to establish a baseline. So we don't want more than 25% of our roads in very poor condition. And right now we're certainly exceeding that. I just want to say roughly we're at 13 or 15% this year, in very poor condition.
Okay, but that's less than 25.
Yes, exactly. So
We're within the performance measures and, at the 130, we've done pretty well.
we have it, and we can show where we anticipate at 103 million looking over the next 10 years.
And then just a easy question, what's the difference between paving and roadway?
So paving is well, just that paving, right? Roadway is like culverts, ledge projects, if there was a landslide or something like that, that would all be within the roadway program.
So I guess it's not that easy. So is a single project in one area?
Correct.
Okay, so you don't split something out, put the
No.
culverts in one. Okay.
No, so the only exception to that is if we know a paving project's coming to town, we will oftentimes move a project in that our maintenance districts do, which would replace all the culverts that are bad on that paving project, so that when we come through,
Okay.
we're not like coming back a year later and replacing the culvert.
Totally. Okay. Thanks.
But we will next week. It would be helpful to understand what those measurements are and what our goals of what we're trying to keep. So
Yes.
adjust the schedule to make sure that there's time for that. So we have, we're grounded in the base of what we're trying to do.
Yes, absolutely happy to do that.
I think we did get, when you came before, you gave us that wonderful chart of kind of showing us where we were.
Correct, and it's on V-Transparency actually, so it has the pavement conditions, so you can see over the, I think it's last
Yeah,
10
we
years.
get the conditions,
Yeah.
but what goes into the makeup of that, I
Yeah.
think is important.
Okay, happy to dive deeper into the technical sort of calculus there. I just want to, when the generic budget is presented or the budget on a page, there's sort of a town programs category. And I just want to highlight that the town highway bridges portion of that is part of the highway, sort of task. And so I just highlight that here in that, there was a 16.6% reduction in town highway bridges.
Yeah.
Even though it won't show up on the budget on the page.
I would just say in that it's hard to look at town highway bridges in a year to year because you get a town that has a really big project and it gets that you have to, from my point of view, you have to look at over a 10 or 15 year period and say where we headed in overall.
I absolutely agree, and great point, because if you look at the picture on the right, this is the Hartford VA cutoff road, obviously a huge project. I forget even what it did cost, but it was out of the town highway bridge program. It's now complete. So great point there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Art, go ahead.
Just along those lines, the reason, when I look at a 16% reduction in that program, is it because we've completed a lot of projects in bulk, which is what I think I just heard?
Absolutely. There's a lot of variability in that program just because one project can really skew it.
Mhm.
Right. And like, I think last year there was the VA cutoff road, there was a bridge in Stowe and one other that were all sort of under concurrent construction.
Right.
So, there's not a priority in saying we're investing $7.5 million less this year in some sort of town aid. We just finished 2 projects.
Thank you for doing that project. I go over it almost every other day. I have a question. I
Yeah.
get constituent things on that, Rick, so at some point I'll follow up with.
So the 2 grant programs to structures and class 2 roadway. There's reductions there. And what's going on there?
So I believe, and that maybe Candace can help me, I think there's a statutory minimum there, and these recommendations go to that minimum.
That's correct. Candace Lumpus, CFO, that's correct. We budgeted to the statutory minimum this year.
When was the last time we were at the statutory minimum?
Last year.
Last year.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't mean it, yeah.
Yeah, but that's what,
No, if I may just also, it probably was 5 or 6 years ago, we weren't. And both committees kept pointing that out. And that's changed, and we have been consistent now for probably at least 5 years, a minimum of the statutory minimum. Regardless of what the programs in those towns were.
I would just say, from my point of view, that I understand how difficult this all is and where you have to go. If the state has been facing inflation in their projects, more than likely the towns have to, and to see reductions in this area of the towns is difficult. Yeah, and I know the difficulties that you're going through. Okay.
So just because it is important to understand how we make decisions on where reduction can and cannot come through, and kind of this slide is just to show sort of the composition of those totals. And so the federal funding, you can see, and that's obvious. The state fund is the transportation fund. And then the TIB is obviously a separate funding source. So the important message here is you can see there's very little or no state funds for bridges, and that's because we use the TID funds for bridges. So when we have to make a reduction in transportation fund, it really narrows what projects we can look at to delay or make reductions in those programs. I believe when we presented last week on sort of the implications of the JTOC transfer, it was very paving heavy and then one roadway project. And this is the reality of why we made those choices.
There were at least two of us on house transportation when the TID bond fund was created, so.
Not me.
Representative Corcoran reminded me of that yesterday.
I was chair, so.
He reminded me of that too.
Sorry.
This you've seen before, if the JTOC appropriation was not, left in the, AOT transportation fund, this is what we're looking at. Four cut, again, paving heavy with, one roadway project. And so really something I want to highlight here is, yes, it's a $12.5 million transportation impact, but really it's a $44 million sort of impact in projects for FY26 and $100 million total impact because many of these projects are multiple years. So the total project impact is $100 million.
Just one quick one on the Pittsford Brandon. I almost hate to ask, is that the last leg maybe, or close to it, or
It's, I believe it's two more after.
two more?
Yeah.
Okay. That's been a while, but it's,
Yeah.
not your fault.
Yes.
But
I would say, just along those lines, there are a number of large legacy roadway projects, for lack of a better word. And we are taking a look at all of those projects right now, making sure what we're moving forward still aligns with a realistic objective of those projects. With 78 Putney Road, Pittsford Brandon, Cabot Danville, all of those are getting a second look right now, just because the fiscal realities are, if you've got let's just say a $60 million roadway project, and you've got a $40 million roadway budget, you're essentially committing a huge percentage of that budget for 2 to 3 years on one project. So we need to make sure our projects are right sized. Question?
No.
Okay.
Agree.
Okay.
So I want to talk to you about the Brattleboro project and just understand how those decisions get made. Does V-Trans make those decisions?
In terms of,
Which projects get done?
yes, yeah, so we have, a fairly data-driven project collection process,
Oh, yeah.
right? And so, it's been reminded, Costa remembers the days where we were in this room
Right,
saying,
right.
I want this project, not
Right.
this project. And
Right.
so I think, using asset management principles helps us drive these projects.
I'm reluctant to get into the details
Yeah.
like the House Committee would get into, but somewhat we at least need to understand it from a high level to be able to talk about,
And I think it'll be informative next week when we dig into those performance measures, what's the actual sort of quantitative measures that we look at. And then, briefly confirm sort of our Vanis product, which is the software. And just at a very high level, essentially, we put in available funding and it runs somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 iterations to figure out the most efficient use of that funding based on deterioration models of the roadway, what their current condition is, and, is this a preservation? Do we wait? Do we do a more intensive project later? And it just looks at all those variables and just keeps running iteration and iteration with those performance measures in mind and says, okay, this is the best outcome looking at those two performance measures.
pretty much the agency doesn't just pick projects based upon where it is. I will tell you, when I first got
Yeah.
to the legislature, there was a lot more.
I know, that's good.
And and pretty much the agency doesn't do that.
No, I'm not aware of you doing that at all. So,
We certainly try.
to my chagrin.
This last slide just sort of shows looking at 26 as a consistent where I'm placing our values, shall we say, and the distribution of that total budget. So we're targeting $100 million in paving, $100 million in bridges, $40 million for roadway projects, $40 million traffic and safety projects, and then $30 million in kind of emerging needs and preservation type projects. Obviously, this isn't everything. I didn't include bike pad and parking ride and everything, but as far as like the big core network priorities, this is what we're aiming for, given what we know today.
When you come in next week. I totally appreciate this, but if, you could think about, and we had the conversation about paving. What does this mean in the amount of projects and what we're doing? And how do I quantify and tell somebody outside of this room, I'm doing 100 million in bridges? What does that mean? And what does that mean compared to the last 3 to 5 years? And, you know, as the secretaries talked about in the inflation, we're up against that inflation and the difficulty that managing around that for the agency is pretty significant. So
Yep.
if you could think about this and think about a way when you come back next week to couple that with, you know, when I'm saying paving, when I'm really at, you know, 120 miles, versus 200, that's pretty clear. But if you could think about it in those terms to help us talk about it.
Yes. Yeah, and I can absolutely throw some numbers at it. I do want to be a little bit guarded in that there's going to be layers of assumptions in those.
Absolutely.
Principally, just as an example, paving is much more consistent and predictable in the cost of the project. Bridges are all over the place, obviously.
But you're way better at looking at that and summarizing
Yes.
it than I am.
We can absolutely, I think if it satisfies the need, maybe put some bookmarks on sort of like what that roughly means and sort of establish a range. Bookends, excuse me.
I feel like this, okay, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, bookmarks doesn't make any sense. Yeah, bookends, excuse me.
Go ahead.
I think we, at one point, thought we got a letter in the past from the Secretary of Transportation or some kind of like, this is the holistic, like more of a narrative form of everything, but maybe I.
So there's a couple possibilities. We have a transportation asset management plan, the TAMP, which helps describe those priorities and how we go about the decision making. I won't burden you with you guys reading it all, but we will definitely touch on that next week. Also, we do have, you know, part of that deterioration model, you know, there will be a narrative component. I won't necessarily present it, but you can produce it.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen that in the past, but.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything other than the TAMP, but
When you put out a sheet like this and the budget distribution, the first thing that somebody not from here will look at is what does that mean?
Yep.
So
Senator White made me thinking of the fact.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
You still produce those? Oh.
You know, if I may, much of that information is on the website, but much of the fact book was recapping the most recent prior fiscal year. So it was already 6 months old when we produced it, and it created some controversy. And so we just decided to avoid future controversy, we would just put that information on the website and not add an incomplete portion of a year to the, it was complicated.
Okay.
And unless you took time to explain it to people, like it created more consternation in the last few years. But that may be where you started.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
I think for today, we're probably ready to say, let's move on. And I know Ernie's stuck his head in here twice.
When you have a second.
What's that?
I just wanted to ask you one thing, if I may. Before.
Sure.
When you spoke of creating the TIP fund when you were chair in the House, we discussed, and certainly Jeremy, Candace, if I misremember, stop me before I misspeak. But if there could be a conversation in the future about the TIB revenue and not locking the TIB revenue to the parameters of TIB when there's no TIB debt. And why I say that is when Jeremy showed you the slide of all the bridge projects, the TIB revenue had to go to those things. If we don't have TIB debt, and we're allowed to use the revenue raised from TIB elsewhere in the program, it would free up the decisions we have before us.
I totally am. I'm totally open to having discussions about how that would come together, and we're going to have to think about flexibility into the future, and that clearly is something that we'd like to talk. The only thing that I would say is anything like that, I want the treasurer in the room, because we had very strict guidelines around how the money got raised, and because it was a new source of money, that it allowed us to put a fence around this and not have the debt in the TIB bond fund go against the bonded indebtedness of the state. And we wouldn't want to do anything that jeopardized that, but totally willing to, going forward in the future, to have discussions around, is there a better way to do this that will get us a better bang for the buck?
Thank you.
But totally open to that as a discussion. But you were very careful as we constructed it to make sure that debt didn't go against the bonded indebtedness. And we do have a chair of a committee that would not want us to horn in on her ability to put together a capital plan.
Right, but I also want to use our assets well.
Yes.
So I think that's a really good discussion.
Yeah, it's a really, really good discussion.
Yeah, we need to.
But
Yeah.
you know,
happy to be
there are a lot of
yeah.
pieces to that, but we're totally open to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, can we take 5 minutes and yeah.